10 a.m., isn't it? And the
Yes.
started in San Francisco. So you basically, you've been starting this entire kind of movie event, cult movie event really, at the Castro Theatre, with usually more than 1,000 attendees for each of these productions. I attended a few of those. They are like absolutely mind-blowing. You've been featuring, in films of John Waters, but you also have been featuring people like John Waters, Cloris Leachman, Appolonia, Barry Bostwick, Pam Grier, and many, many more. I mean, you're just a legend. You've been pretty much, if I was to say that the word drag queen was invented, it's pretty much after you. And I'm just going to say as well that you have your own Midnight Mass television show. And right now you are figuring out ways to still maintain the nightlife spirit in San Francisco. And maybe you can tell us a bit about that too. How you all support each other and how the nightlife support each other in California at this point in time, because we know that in the US as well, like there is absolutely no help for anything.
Right.
So yeah. Anyway, I'm handing it over to you. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. And you're also a board member of the University of the Underground, and you've been helping us always tremendously. So we're so grateful to have you with us now.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Nellie. Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. This is this is really strange. Basically, what I did the last time I was invited to speak at the University of the Underground was basically just tell my story. And because as a creative person, I sort of did things my own way, for better or worse. I feel like maybe there's value in this older person kind of sharing my sort of story. So with that being said, I'll just go ahead and dive right in, and then at the end, I guess Nellie will do questions and stuff after I tell this very abbreviated version of my life story. So I was a weirdo kid. I grew up in Maryland. Maryland is between, is the state next to Washington, D.C. and, Baltimore, kind of, I grew up in Annapolis, a very small sort of historic town that was very conservative, and I didn't fit in there. I felt like a black sheep. I was definitely a strange kid, not just because I was queer, but because I was obsessed with the macabre and anything, dark or spooky. I loved horror movies and stuff from a really young age. And around the time, I guess I was in junior high, I knew that I wanted to be in the entertainment business. I was always that kid who was, flamboyant and outrageous. And, my parents wanted to put me in sports and things, and I always rejected that. I guess if you were going to look at sort of gendering what I was like as a kid, I was definitely more like into girly things than boy things. I was definitely a sissy. And so I was unapologetic about my, sort of desire to create theater, make movies, and be weird. I just didn't sort of know enough to protect myself and hide. So of course there was a lot of bullying and things that went along with that. Now, growing up, I definitely ended up winning the support of my parents. I used to create these haunted attractions where I would write and direct shows and cast the neighborhood kids, and my mother would sell the tickets, and my dad would take the chain off the chainsaw and, be the finale monster. And that was about the time I was 13 or 14. And it sort of gave me a taste for both creative pursuit for the public, but also a way to monetize it. And, selling tickets and running a little bit of a business was something that, I realized as a creative person, as an artist living in the United States, was going to be important for me if I wanted to succeed. Around this time, I discovered John Waters, the filmmaker. the incredible underground filmmaker, and Divine, and the fact that they were making these transgressive midnight movies just up the street from where I grew up really blew my mind. It sort of changed my worldview of what was possible. Divine was really the first drag queen I'd ever been introduced to. And I'm so glad that Divine was the first, because, you know, instead of being introduced to sort of, you know, a female illusionist who, you know, it might be impersonating, you know, Judy Garland or something. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's amazing. But, you know, my first taste of drag was, you know, this 300-pound man dressed as a punk rock woman, you know, literally eating dog shit. You know, that was life-changing for me. And I wanted to be her friend, and I wanted to hang out with those people. My sort of view of the world was kind of changed forever after seeing films like Pink Flamingos and Female Trouble.
Joshua, do you have
Yeah.
any pictures or any, because I would say that it's a very international group. So some of them know about Divine, and maybe some of them don't know about Divine. So maybe if you want to share your screen and like show, you know, on the online as you speak along, or I don't know how you plan this, just so then they can all follow you.
So I don't, let's see.
See if we can, like you have, you can do the share screen, and then you can kind of like run us through the, just in case some people don't know who Divine is.
Okay, so Divine, is this working? No.
Yeah. We saying, yeah, that's, here we go.
Okay, so Divine, here's Divine at the end of Pink Flamingos. You know, basically John Waters and Divine concocted this idea where she would actually eat dog shit at the end of this film, which, you know, is just outrageous and disgusting. But it ended up catapulting this group of Maryland punk rock filmmakers into being famous on the midnight movie circuit. So Divine was, you know, for me, just endlessly inspiring. The other thing that I discovered around the same time that I'm guessing more of you are familiar with is the Rocky Horror Picture Show. You know, the Rocky Horror Picture Show was another thing that was endlessly inspiring to me. So I knew I had to get the hell out of Maryland, and I knew I had to go and pursue, you know, some sort of creative life in either New York or LA or something. But I couldn't afford to go to school in New York. NYU was just way too expensive, and I ended up going to Penn State University, where I majored in film production, and it was a more conservative Big Ten university. And I made a movie called Jizz Mopper, a love story. And Jizz Mopper was where I first appeared in drag as Peaches. And that performance as Peaches, while also writing and directing a movie, kind of put me on a path. And I, you know, basically was doing drag, performing in drag as Peaches Christ, as this character I'd created as a hobby. I mean, there wasn't, you know, drag queens at that time didn't, you know, there wasn't this sense that you could have a career doing it. So I basically started to perform as Peaches in San Francisco after graduating. I moved to San Francisco because of the underground film scene that was so prevalent here. And being in San Francisco, I found sort of my troupe. My friends were all part of this drag cabaret nightlife experience, which was held at the Stud Tuesday nights at midnight. We performed sort of outrageous and bizarre drag shows, conceptual sort of performance art style drag shows. Many of us are still, you know, collaborating today, and that was back in 1996. That's when I started performing there, and I met a lot of these people, some of whom went on to, you know, have bigger careers. If you've heard of the band, the Scissor Sisters, my friend Anna Matronic was one of the original members of our drag troupe. Ben Santos, who's a very successful drag performer as well, was one of the original members. So there were a lot of us that were young and naive and dumb and hungry. We wanted to just sort of perform, and we didn't care that we were poor. We were really, really poor, and we were still somehow able to pay rent in San Francisco and scrape together money and put on these ridiculous shows. And over the years, after a couple years of performing there, I started my own show called Midnight Mass, which was based on the Cockettes. And I'm going to show you a Cockettes film trailer. This is the documentary about the Cockettes. This is a troupe of underground, basically kind of in the hippie revolution in the summer of love in 1969. The Cockettes formed, and they were a drag troupe who lived in a commune here in San Francisco. They all lived in the same house that included the singer Sylvester. If you know Sylvester, you know the song Mighty Real. The Cockettes were also inclusive of those Baltimore people I mentioned. Anyway, they basically created this sort of drag culture in San Francisco that exists today, where men, women, bearded drag queens, anything goes. Drag is more about art than it is about being a man dressing as a woman. So here's a little taste of the Cockettes. Can you guys, I don't know if you guys can hear I'm hoping you can hear it when it plays.
We should be able to. Yeah.
Stupid commercial.
Job to set the subject at ease. Hi, I'm Maxine.
Before the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
There's Divine sang crab on your anus means you're loved and brought down the house.
Before Watergate.
Drop those trousers.
San Francisco gave birth to the legendary.
It's so tacky.
Magical.
Would you like to go up or down?
Musical. Immortals of dazzling glamour and artistry. The Cockettes. Glorious group of performers who created a social and sexual revolution that changed America forever.
We had the Cockette House. That was our family. I thought we were the most beautiful, creative people in the city. This was the dream. We were on a spiritual quest. This was what we were born to do. We were born to change everything.
We really did believe there'd be a revolution any minute.
We were playing to packed houses. And that put us into a whole new ballgame. We were going to New York.
Everybody who was in New York at that time was there. Andy Warhol was there.
And John Lennon.
They're calling the Cockettes the best time I had at the movies at Sundance. Inspiring, charming, exuberant, and wildly entertaining. The Cockettes.
It was complete sexual anarchy, which is always a wonderful thing. The Cockettes.
Thank you.
So that just gives you a little taste of the Cockettes right there. And I would, if you're interested, definitely seek out that film if you haven't seen it yet. It's a great example of San Francisco drag. What the trailer alludes to is that, but they don't give you the results, is that the Cockettes did get to go to New York City and do a big show there, and they failed miserably. New York hated it. They thought it was sloppy and sophomoric and terrible and drug-fueled. And I think in many ways, this dynamic between San Francisco and New York still exists, where even in the drag world today, you know, with things like RuPaul's Drag Race, San Francisco is often overlooked on the show or dismissed, partly because we don't confine ourselves at all to any sort of sense of rules or, or in some ways logic, which is why I think I've fit in here so well over the years. So the Coquettes did this midnight movie show at a movie theater in San Francisco, the Palace Theater. And I had, of course, known about the Coquettes, even though they were doing their thing in 1969, 1970, and I was coming along in the late 90s. But I wanted so badly to do a show in a movie theater. I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever heard of. So I did a deal where I convinced an old, single screen movie theater to not only let me run the movie theater as a young manager, but also to allow me to do shows there every Saturday night at midnight as Peaches Christ with my friends before screening transgressive cult movies. So that's really where my sort of performance career took off, was doing those shows. The show was called Midnight Mass. And when it started, it was outrageous and wild. And I look back on it now and I realize so much of it was illegal. I mean, I probably, I probably could have, I probably could even do a search right now. We used to do things like drag queen roller derby in the theater itself, where I would put drag queens on roller skates and have them skate around the movie theater. Stuff like that safety wise. Okay, here's drag queen roller derby. Safety wise, not allowed to do now. So that was the wig snatching round of drag queen roller derby. I mean, it wasn't unusual to have ambulances show up at midnight mass and have drag queens be carried out on stretchers. And we used to do mud wrestling, and I would do big theater shows, and we'd have special guests, and the audience were all on drugs and all wasted, and it was a free for all. It was a creative free-for-all. It was completely anarchy, but it was for us it was a safe space to really be creative and to make stuff. At the same time that I was doing these live shows, I was also pursuing movies and making movies with my friends in our spare time, and then I would show the movies to these audiences at midnight mass. And so I created, along with the Midnight Mass audience, I created something called the San Francisco Underground Film Festival, where I basically took all the rejected movies of filmmakers, local filmmakers who were kind of basically rejected from the establishment film festivals. And then we would screen, the trashiest, most outrageous films, at our festival, and celebrate sort of these renegade filmmakers, some of whom have gone on to actually become pretty successful, legit filmmakers in the film world. My thing was, I was just so pissed that, like, for me to to be even included in a film festival, I had to pay some fucking fee, to a film festival just to even be considered. So our thing was no fee ever, submit whatever movie you want to submit. And, we're gonna probably screen the stuff that we think is the least likely to make it into a Sundance or San Francisco International Film Festival. And through creating short films and continuing to perform as Peaches, I built enough of an audience, kind of accidentally, that certain people started coming to my shows who actually had, power or clout. And so those people started, saying things like that I was making, legitimate content that should be taken seriously, even though I thought, and I still think, those short films, most of my stuff was just ridiculous, and mostly me making it for a very niche audience. But despite my thinking that, those short films started to get programmed at film festivals, and I ended up being flown to Belgium and Lausanne, Switzerland, and England, and these movies that I made. I mean, one of the movies literally cost $50. We shot it in a weekend, and I was then being flown around to screen these trashy, stupid movies. which I think, you know, is still pretty funny. I'm actually going to do an online screening of them in next week, because as we all know, it's very strange right now as far as you know, entertainment or keeping things going. So as Peaches, I'm going to do a night of my short films next week as a partial fundraiser for the Stud Bar here in San Francisco. Anyway, after some time, Midnight Mass ended up becoming 10 years old. Like, I'd been doing it for 10 years. And at this point, I wanted to make a feature film. And what happened was, I don't know if you guys know, in America, we have a show called Shark Tank, where it's these sort of billionaire people who basically hear people's business proposals and then approve them or don't. And I know they have a version of this show all over the world. Anyways, one of the billionaires, his name is Mark Cuban. He owns a big sports team here in the United States, in Dallas, Texas. He ended up becoming a fan of mine, and he ended up creating this TV show for me called Midnight Mass. And he put it on his television network, HDnet, here in North America. And that sort of catapulted me to get this bigger audience of weirdos and freaks, because now I was sort of outside of the bubble of San Francisco. And I'll show you just maybe the beginning of this TV show. But this TV show was produced by the very heterosexual, you know, athletic Mark Cuban. I like pointing that out because you never know where a patron might come from. If you had ever asked me if Mark Cuban would have been a fan of my stuff, I would have said, hell no, we have nothing in common. Why would that man, you know, who seems like such a frat boy, such a fraternity type guy, be interested in me? But he was, and he ended up financing this TV show. So I'll just show the beginning of it. Midnight Mass with your hostess, me, Peaches Christ.
Ten years of Midnight Mass. And we got Elvira. Elvira's here. Couldn't you just die?
She has the most stunning eyes, and what I love most about Elvira, I must say, she's not a threat to women. She is like the Mae West of this millennium, because she makes sexuality fun.
A lot of people ask me, you know, who are your drag role models? And to be totally honest, I mean, I love a lot of drag queens, and Divine is my favorite all-time drag. But some drag queens mask themselves as other things. And really, one of my all-time favorite drag queens is Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. Elvira was the role model I grew up watching every Saturday afternoon. I loved her movie Macabre Show. It's where I found a lot of my favorite sort of B cinema cult movies as a kid. She's all the things that Peaches wants to be. You know, she's dark. She has real boobs. You know, they're very big. She is hilarious. You know, she's sort of a valley girl, but with a gothic, you know, before gothic was popular, kind of edge to it. I love Elvira, and it's always a thrill to work with Elvira, and it's amazing to me that through Midnight Mass, I've had the chance to meet Elvira, and that we're actually going to be putting on a stage show together tonight at Midnight Mass.
So anyway, Midnight Mass had now become a TV show that was being broadcast across the country, and we would have special guests such as Elvira. And I was like a kid whose dreams had come true. This this for me, I'd never imagined that I could turn my sort of love of cult movies and performance and drag and art and insanity and anarchy into something that was slowly but surely becoming my career. You know, especially I think in the United States, there's this sense that you should have a job, and that job pays your bills, and then the things that you really care about, you have to cram into your spare time, you know. So if you're really passionate about something, you need to think of it as a hobby, because, you know, it's unrealistic that you could, you know, have a career, you know, being a drag performer, you know, named after Jesus or whatever. So for me at this point, I was starting to realize, like, oh my God, I could, like Mark Cuban has a TV show. I should make a movie. I should make a real movie. I've made these little short films for no money. I want to make a real movie. So I thought Mark might finance this movie, but he didn't, which was fine. Except, you know, what he did do was he gave me sort of the self-confidence to sit and write a feature-length script and to go out and ask for money, and to try to get something financed that is very strange and you know, kind of not like you know, other mainstream or, you know, even independent films. Luckily, I had enough faith in myself that I could write a script. That's really what it took, was writing a script, because without the script, I don't think my film All About Evil would ever have been made. It was the script that attracted the talent, and it really took you know, getting our lead attached for the film to kind of get off the ground. And so an actress named Natasha Lyonne, who's very very successful now, especially, but she's always been successful. She was a child actress who I grew up loving, was someone that I knew through the cinematographer who was attracted to the script. And so we reached out to Natasha through basically him, and she read the script and she agreed to come on board and do the movie. And we ended up getting the movie financed. And then Cassandra ended up coming on board, and Mink Stole, the John Waters actress. So after this 10-year anniversary of Midnight Mass, I ended up making All About Evil, my first feature film. I'll show the trailer for that, just to give you a taste. Peaches is in the movie, but only sort of secondarily. And I don't know if I do another movie. It was really, really hard being in the movie as Peaches, as well as writing and directing the film. So I don't know if that was the best choice. My least favorite scenes of this film are the ones that I'm in. I hate looking at them. But this is the trailer for All About Evil.
Ladies and gentlemen, Deborah Denise!
Thank you.
Are real.
Getting this in close up, right?
The actor she kills in Final Cut. The show is always in need of some fresh blood.
What? It's only a movie.
Deborah. Everyone is dying to be in her movies. About Evil.
Enjoy the show!
Coming soon.
Okay, so that was my feature film, which once it was made, my dream was to take it on the road and to present it like William Castle did back in the 50s and 60s, where William Castle would basically do things like rig up a skeleton in the movie theaters so that when the movie was playing, you know, a skeleton would come flying out of the screen into the audience, stuff like that. So when All About Evil was released, I convinced the distributors and the financer to send me on the road and do a live event. And it was like, I think 13 different American cities where we traveled to each city. And what we did was I would send along YouTube videos. We utilized technology. I would send along these videos training like a local drag troupe on the choreography for the performances and the makeup and the hair. And so we would get to a different city and I would meet all these new drag performers, and we would do a rehearsal, and then we would do the show, and the movie would premiere, and then I would go on to the next city. So we did this sort of live rollout, actually including doing the show in London and Manchester and a few places overseas. Sitges in Spain, we did the event there as part of the film festival, the genre film festival in Sitges. And so this was, for me, it was kind of my baby. It was sort of the thing that I dreamed of someday doing as a kid, and to get to be able to travel with the show and to get to put on performances. It was very surreal for the audience to sort of see Peaches Christ. And often what I would do was, a lot of times they didn't get it. Like I would be Peaches and do a whole show and introduce the movie. And then while the movie was running, I would get out of Peaches. And then at the end of the movie, they would have me come back as Joshua, and I would do a Q&A as the writer and director, but as Joshua. And often a lot of the audience didn't realize that it was the same person, even though we weren't hiding it. It just, they couldn't wrap their head around the idea that that big giant clown was also this other person who wrote and directed the film. And I found that whole experience, that whole tour, to be greatly satisfying. But after it was over, what was pretty evident was that I was going to be broke and poor if I continued to go that direction, because independent film is when you're the writer and director of a movie and then you work, for another year rolling out the movie, what you realize is you don't have much cash flow coming in. I was finding it very hard to pay my bills. I was finding it very hard to continue to support a movie where, basically the money is being made by the investors and the distributors. So what I did was started to really focus on live events and touring with live events. And I feel like I had a lot of success with that, thankfully, because it really was able to put me in a much better situation where I could do these big drag shows as Peaches, and I could draw a big audience, at the Castro Theatre, and present a drag parody of a cult movie, and then take it on the road, which is really what I've been doing for the last few years. Obviously, with the current situation, we have no live events for the foreseeable future. The other thing that I've been working on lately is I developed a different production company outside of Peaches Christ Productions that's called Into the Dark, because I'm really interested in immersive theater. I feel like what we've been doing all along with Drag Queen Roller Derby, with the All About Evil tour, and taking the show on the road is a form of immersive theater. So I've created this company called Into the Dark Productions. And that's the thing that I'm really working hard on now, where we're doing immersive theatrical productions where, this show that I do in San Francisco called Terror Vault, it's groups of 10 people going through at a time with scenes and stories and physicality. And it's an intimate experience where we're moving you through sets and moving you through a storyline. That I've been really excited about, and it's probably the thing I've been working hardest on. But with everything being what it is right now, who knows? I don't know if we'll be able to do the next show that we were planning on doing this fall. I can show you a little bit about, this is the trailer for last year's Terror Vault, which kind of gives you an idea.
She joins us live from outside the San Francisco Mint with her trip through the Terror Vault.
Ooh, I did not survive the Terravault. I bailed out of there so fast. I was just terrified.
Can't help you here, little piggy. You're inside the Terravault.
I actually thought it was a different trailer that I was going to show you. There's a different one that actually shows some people going through the show itself. I'll have to look that one up. But anyway, you kind of get the sense for what it is. This doesn't show you as much, but we build elaborate sets, and we've taken over the old San Francisco Mint building, which is this huge, massive building in San Francisco. It's probably the most historical building in the city, which is why it's insane that I now have a big workshop there and an office. And for 6 weeks, I get to create this thing called the Terravault. And we build sets, and we, everything. We have touch, every sensation we're playing with. So I don't know if you noticed, but some people are wearing these red glow necklaces. At the beginning of the show, you as the audience member decide if you want more or less interactivity. If you want more interactivity, you wear a red glow necklace, which indicates to the actors that you can be touched, you can be isolated, you can be forced to crawl, forced to eat something, locked in a room. And so we're really playing with this kind of really four-dimensional form of theater, where we're engaging people in a whole new kind of more aggressive way. And I've been having a blast with it. It feels like it's another thing that we've been doing all along, but now we're kind of taking it to a different level. And I'm proud to say that we have a lot of imitators now. We've been doing this for a few years, and a lot of people are now taking our ideas and implementing them at shows across the country. So Terravault, Peaches Christ, and I'm working on a new feature script and maybe a TV show. That's basically what I'm up to these days. However, as everything's moving online for the time being, I don't know. I'm being creative, or trying to continue to be creative with what to do next while we figure out when we'll be able to have live events again. So I don't know, Nellie, if this is a good place to wrap up.
It's perfect timing to start taking some question. And I guess, you can definitely, everybody just go ahead and ask any question into the chat section of you know how that works by now. But I guess, Joshua, maybe just following up from that last comment, right? Like, we had a conversation with Bassiani with this, nightclub in Tbilisi in Georgia, which was really the start of the investigation of, their project. And Bassiani, we spoke about, basically where will be the spaces for freedom and for, resistance, if, of course, the nightlife cannot open itself anymore. What's
Right.
the kind of the conversation within the drag community? Where are you at, all of you together? How do you, I know that right now you're all about, fundraising and supporting the Stud Bar, and maybe you can tell us a bit more about that specific, bar and, this specific scheme there. But how do you, what sort of conversation are you all living at the moment together?
Okay. So a couple things. As far as the drag community's response, once again, I feel like when we look back on history and we see the way people dealt with this challenge, it was the drag queens, not myself, but I would say drag queens generally, universally. I can't take credit for this because I was not one of them, but it was drag queens who immediately said, fuck this, you're going to shut down our show, we'll put it online. So it was immediate. Drag queens started putting virtual shows online. Like the moment San Francisco shut down, that weekend we had drag shows online, virtual drag shows. So I really give credit to these queens for not you know, kind of rolling over. They basically, and the creativity they're kind of coming up with is been interesting too. It's not just necessarily doing a number in front of your computer. You know, I've been inspired by watching other people to think of new ways to perform a drag number. So I could show you one I did last week, but basically I reenacted. It's me as if I'm going down into the basement of my building because I lost my friend Lady Bear, and you know, I'm looking for her, and what is basically Buffalo Bill knocks me over the head, and you know, the green goggles come on at the end of Silence of the Lambs, so I do the whole lip sync like I'm in the dark, you know, and it's being filmed through this green lens, and I'm like excited by the challenge of like, well, okay, we have to use a different medium to perform. How do we make it filmic? How do we make it virtual? How do we stay clever and entertain people while we're home, you know? So I'm really impressed by drag queens in general as performers' ability to adapt so quickly, almost in a strange way. Part of that is because I really believe that I do drag because they have to. You know, there's certain performers that do it because they need it. So I think that in many ways that this is not about money or even paying the rent. These performers need this. It's important to them. It's what's going to keep a lot of people healthy throughout this isolation period. You know, staying creative is imperative. And the Stud Bar for me is particularly important because it was the place that in 1996 I found my tribe. It's where I found my community, but it's also important because it was the first gay bar in the United States a few years ago. It was about to be shuttered to be purchased by a 17-person collective of, and it's run as a queer cooperative bar. So 17 different artists came together and purchased that bar, and I you know, helped one of the artists financially. So I'm not one of the owners, but I definitely have been supportive of that cause. And this is going to be devastating for that bar because they have no revenue coming in. They're already struggling to pay the rent as it is, as a 17-person artist collective running a historic gay bar in San Francisco. So I'm doing what I can with whatever Peaches clout I have to help them raise money. What's sad to me is that everyone needs money right now, you know, so it's that thing where, you know, you almost feel like every restaurant, every small business is hurting. Okay, should I take questions from the chat?
Yes, we have a question from Jan. So Jan, you should pop up on your screen when Jan is asking you.
Hi.
Yay.
Hello.
Oh, nice.
I did this tribute to Divine. I'm a big fan too of her, and I think she changed my life too when I was a teenager. And my question is a little about this because, well, when I saw like Pink Flamingos and all of this time with Divine, John Walters is very counter culture, and now drag is became mainstream. I think because of RuPaul, you can tell better about this. Is one question, and I want to know more about the realness aspect in drag. That is something that interests a lot for me in my own work, and I want to you talk more about this. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I think that's a good question. It's definitely a question I've been asked a lot. The media and drag fan culture now refers to some of us as legends, and I sometimes get referred to as a legend, which I think means old. Which no, I don't actually mind it at all, but it means there's some of us who are around before Drag Race, right? And we were doing this stuff before RuPaul's Drag Race. I give RuPaul so much credit for being, you know, a total trailblazer and knocking down walls. And certainly RuPaul, if you look at her early career, was just as punk rock as any of us. If you seek out her film Star Booty, or you see where she came from, you know, it's just that she had the fortune of and the luck and the talent to become mainstream. You know, she has brought drag into the mainstream. And you know, my issue right now, or my experience, I work with a lot. I have drag daughters who have been on Drag Race. I have 2 drag daughters. I don't know if you guys know, in drag culture, we have drag families where there are mothers, and the drag mothers take in children. And we, you know, sort of advise and coach and teach younger drag queens. So one drag daughter I have is Jinkx Monsoon, and another drag daughter I have is Bob the Drag Queen. And, you know, I'm very, very proud that both those drag children have won RuPaul's Drag Race. I am a fan of RuPaul's Drag Race. However, I am not necessarily a fan of drag fan culture, meaning that there was a time when I could do a drag show, and straight, gay, whoever, John Waters calls my audience hetero-flexible. You know, that the audience would show up and they were queer, you know, regardless of who you slept with. They were weirdos. They were outsiders. They were people who didn't fit in. They were the same people who would go to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show. They were different, and they were usually people who didn't enjoy the privilege of being beautiful and heterosexual and wealthy. And so there was this bond. And I think with drag becoming so popular now, to me, it's sort of like the pumpkin latte of entertainment. Like, it's become this sort of like basic thing. And I think drag itself hasn't necessarily gotten watered down. Like, I feel like if you look at the talent that's on Drag Race, these girls are very talented, very smart, very clever, you know, and deserving. But I think drag culture, especially the fan culture, has become really shitty. And, you know, kind of, and I think part of that's the internet, you know, part of that's, you know, just, you know, young people kind of ruining a good thing. But yeah, so I'm a fan of what Drag Race has done in a lot of ways. And then I'm bummed out, you know, I'm just glad that I was around long enough that I can say I was part of drag when drag was cool. I don't know if drag's going to be cool in 10 years.
And we have a question from Zach. Are you here, Zach? Which is about your style, actually, which I think you should definitely tell them about, how you build your character. Where are you, Zach?
I'm here. So my question is, are there stylistic tendencies in drag that are unique to the San Francisco Bay Area or the West Coast that you might not see on the East Coast of the United States or in Europe or wherever else?
Okay, good question. I would say that San Francisco, in many ways, as far as drag culture goes, has been a real birthplace for a lot of different drag styles. A lot of people think of the San Francisco drag style universally as being that of kind of the coquettes or camp drag, the kind of drag I do, which is inspired by the coquettes and outrageous clown makeup and sort of a glamazonian, you know, larger than life femininity. You know, for me, I never thought of being Peaches as being myself impersonating a woman. That was never my intention. Peaches is the feminine expression of Joshua. You know, she's the queen that was deep down inside this little sissy boy growing up. You know, she's the combination of all the cult film women I love so much. Tura Satana, Divine. You know, I see someone has Ursula in the background of their yes, Ursula, of course, was based on Divine, right? So, you know, all of these women that have inspired me. Peaches is sort of this manifestation or this cartoon version of myself in a way. Then, of course, there is this sort of pageant system that was also born in San Francisco through the Imperial Court. The Jose Sarria created the imperial court here, and that was much more about being regal and beautiful. And to talk more about realness, I didn't address it earlier. It was more about realness and passing and the fun of creating illusion to the degree that you're, you know, maybe tricking someone, you know, much like we've seen in the ballroom scenes of New York or Paris is Burning, where realness was really important. So that also was born in San Francisco. The Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which is a drag queen, drag nun. They dress as nuns. This was an activist group born in the late 70s that now has chapters all over the world. So I feel like San Francisco doesn't have one definable style. If anything, I would say that what's unique about San Francisco is it was often the first. It was the hotbed, and then these sort of movements kind of exploded out from here. And my bitter old queen, you know, idea today is, wait, we don't get enough credit. So I'm kind of over here going like, hey, don't forget, historically, you know, a lot of this stuff that everyone takes for granted was actually created here by, you know, small groups of people who ended up, you know, changing the way we see drag around the world, but in a lot of different ways.
So Joshua, you have a great question here about Mischief Eagle Testicle, and Amanda, you here. I'd love you to tell us a bit more about that character. Where are you, Amanda? Have I got lost?
Amanda?
Amanda?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yay, we can.
Hello, Amanda. Why don't you ask your question? Because I'm reading it now.
Okay. First, huge fan.
Thank you.
We have some of the scratch and sniffs from those old movies and things like that. Anyway, I'm an Indigenous artist researcher from Canada, and I wondered if you've heard of or seen the artist Kent Monkman's alter ego, Mischief Eagle Testicle. I'm not really sure what my question is because it's a big thing, but I just wonder if there's support for the Indigenous artists that perform and try to incorporate resistance to colonialism in their work as well. And anyway, miigwech, thanks for sharing.
Sure. Now, you actually, Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong. Is Mischief Eagle Testicle, is this the artist who paints herself into traditional? Yes. Okay. So I am familiar with her work, and
I think she's done a few performances, but not a whole lot. But yeah.
Yes, but is more of a fine artist.
Yeah,
and what she does is she takes traditional sort of Canadian landscapes and then paints herself into these sort of beautiful, gorgeous paintings. I'm less familiar with the Indigenous activism of Canada for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But I am familiar with that artist, mostly just because I love reading about other, drag artists and people using the medium for activism. I know in the States for sure, there is a lot of support. We have a drag queen here. Her name is Landa Lakes, and she is a Native American drag performer who uses her sort of Berdache identity to create a lot of work, and has definitely done a lot of activism around Indigenous people in the United States.
Yeah.
And we do show up for each other when we're invited, when it's appropriate, and when she asks. And I would say in general, that's another part of drag culture that's always been part of this medium, whatever you want to call it, performance or artistry or identity. It's always been in line with pushing an activist agenda, a progressive agenda. And so you can look at that from the late 60s, from the Cockettes, well, Stonewall. I mean, it's always been there. And sometimes I think, well, why is that? Why are we often the people on the front lines? And I think part of it is, when I made the decision to start dressing in wigs and wear makeup back in the mid 90s and call myself Christ, you really don't have much more to lose, you know. So when it was time to get out and get on the front lines and fight, you know, I've already been beaten up, I've already been gay bashed, I've already, you know, so it's like I'm, you know, typically these drag performers, the butch dykes, the trans folks, the non-binary folks, we tend to be the ones on the front lines because we're used to a beatdown and we're used to a fight. And sadly, I think it's still, you know, not tons has changed, you know.
No, I just like to add one thing too, that I really think it's awesome, because your work and Chief Eagle Testicle's work speaks to us as Indigenous people, because these colonial binaries really were something that we didn't, like, I don't have a language for it in my, so I just think it's like, it's more truthful to like who we are in a sense. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
We assume that this idea of gender has been around forever when it has not. And if you look at, you go to Hawaii, you look at Native American culture in the US, you look at Indigenous people in Canada, you know, their concept of gender is not at all what the colonial concept was.
Yeah.
So you're right, you know?
Yeah. No, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much, Joshua. I mean, maybe just to kind of link to some of the lecture that they had before in terms of voguing, how do you position drag and drag show in relationship to voguing in terms of, you know, resistance to a certain, you know, establishment, or do you see them at all being connected? Is that a community that kind of like meet with each other? How does that kind of connect? Because they've had some discussion around voguing, and voguing being a place as well where the which eventually was underground and became mainstream, and the kind of the, you know, the critique of that as well.
I would say that it's there's a lot of overlap. Like when I started, you know, back in the mid 90s, there was definitely, I think partly there was this sense that the voguing scene in New York, or the ballroom scene of New York and LA and Chicago, it was underground for sure, but because all of us were basically queer and underground and strange, there was a lot of overlap. And so the movements that came out from, you know, different, you know, like the Imperial Court, for example, and the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence and the Vogue scene, what we would find often is that while we were in different cliques and in different communities, we had enough in common that we did often find ourselves aligning. So for example, with AIDS, what you found was people from the voguing community, people from, you know, the tranny shack community, people from the Imperial Court, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, certainly lesbian nurses, butch lesbians, and at the time we didn't have the word non-binary, but non-binary folks for sure, that under this umbrella, because we were all marginalized, we ended up working, you know, together. So ACT UP, if you look at ACT UP as a movement, you're gonna see all those different sort of cliques. Now, with the popularity of drag and gay people being much more accepted into culture, that's not, you know, we see a lot more division between all of these groups, and a lot more, what unfortunately I think is often counterproductive. It's a lot more divisiveness and separation between groups and people, and, you know, and the popularity of drag and the business side of drag. There's just a lot, it's just a lot more complicated than it used to be. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
It does. And maybe you can tell them a bit about the experience you had in Dublin as well, when you're talking about the establishment too.
And
because
no, it wasn't Dublin.
Religion. We spoke about religion as well. Like we had someone called M who taught them a class on inventing your own cult and your own religion. But then, you know, I mean, anyway, tell them about maybe that experience.
Well, it was Belfast. It was Northern Ireland, and I had I had done a radio interview on the BBC. Actually, not in Belfast. I did it in, I think, Manchester, but it was, you know, broadcast across the UK. And I was tired and I was jet lagged, and the interviewer kept going after me about, you know, why did you name yourself Christ? How could you do that? You know, your show is called Midnight Mass. Aren't you worried about offending people? And I said, no, I'm not. You know, clearly I'm not. Like, I grew up Catholic, and, you know, I was force-fed this this religious doctrine that was designed to shame me and to basically cause me to believe I was doing something sinful just by virtue of who I am. And I'm not at all worried about, you know, offending people. You know, I use the name Christ to entertain people and to sort of take some of the power or sting away for myself. You know, I'm not intentionally offending people, but if you're offended, fuck you, I don't care. You know, and then I went on to say, like, this word, this name Christ is being used to do a lot more than some silly drag queen. You know, this name has been used to, you know, manipulate and molest children, start wars, you know, spill blood. Like, why are you coming for me? Like, maybe check your own priorities. Anyway, she got me all worked up. And when I got to Belfast, I was met by country officials who told me that I was going to be charged with blasphemy and lewdness, and that I was not going to be allowed to perform there. And all of this stuff and all this paperwork had to happen. And we ended up actually doing the show that we were I was sent there to do. I was on tour with the BFI, of all things. And the British Film Institute had brought me there to do this stupid show I do called Barbarella, where it's Barbarella, but it stars my friend Lady Bear as this giant 300-pound, you know, savior of the universe. It's all poppers and dildos and bad sex jokes and just ludicrous, you know, stuff. But anyway, they had a government official sit at the back of the auditorium and file a report, you know, about my show. And but when it was over, Belfast gave us a standing ovation, and that's the only standing ovation I think that show has ever gotten. And it's because they all knew how important it was to fight for your right to be stupid, I guess.
Thank you so much. I think that's a very good way of finishing this conversation. So everybody, I'm going to ask you to now, well, if you're not one of the